Marc Morano is publisher of Climate Depot and a supporter of President-elect Donald Trump. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Ms. Morano, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Before we talk about any of the picks specifically, generally speaking, do you think a president has any obligation to pick a consensus candidate, or can they pick someone that's in line with their agenda?
There's absolutely no obligation to pick what you call a consensus agenda, because that's probably going to be left of center. The Washington consensus has always been that sort of mainstream position. But I mean, President Obama did not do that. He picked people severely left of the center and very activist, and came in and reshaped American health care and many other agencies, from immigration reform on down. So the idea that it's okay when Democrats do it doesn't fly here now. Donald Trump is going to reshape and attempt to drain the swamp in Washington.
So the answer to the question is you don't think that a president has an obligation to pick a consent. That's fine. It was just a okay.
Sure.
So let's talk about particularly the EPA candidate,
Sure.
Scott Pruitt. As our correspondent Patty Culhane laid out there, he has actually sued the department several times. What does that say to what his relationship might be with this department going forward, should he end up leading it?
It says he's the absolute right man for the job, because Donald Trump campaigned on reining in the regulatory overreach of the Environmental Protection Agency, particularly when it comes to the climate regulations as they affect the coal industry, particularly as it's going to affect all other sorts of carbon-based fossil fuels. So the agency has been put on notice, and he's coming in to reform the agency. This is a good day for American workers, and ultimately it's a good day for the environment, because the more fossil fuels and the more unleashing of our economy, we can continue to clean up the environment. We've done that since 1970, radically improved air and water quality.
Clean up the environment?
We've done it since 1970 with radical improvements in air and water quality, at the same time growing population and economic growth. And the fossil fuel mix has not changed significantly. In fact, over 100 years, our fossil fuel mix has not changed significantly.
Let me ask you this. Donald Trump has said that he wants to rip up the Paris Agreement. Do you think that that is on Pruitt's agenda as well? And how likely do you think that actually is? Is there any room for compromise on Pruitt's agenda, on Donald Trump's agenda, when it comes to the environment?
Well, that's a good question, because Donald Trump is known as the art of the deal. But however, the EPA doesn't deal directly with you. That's going to come more from the State Department and from President Trump himself, dealing with the United Nations. But I actually was down at the UN conference in Morocco and had some fun shredding the actual copy of the UN Paris Agreement before UN security, armed UN security, escorted me out. And I had a cardboard cutout of Donald Trump there to show them. But that's a much easier job, because President Obama has essentially, on both domestic and international climate policy, bypassed democracy. He used executive orders to do the EPA when Congress failed to pass cap and trade repeatedly. And he also did an executive agreement, or did not submit the U.S. Paris Agreement for ratification, as treaties are traditional. So Donald Trump has many options: withdrawing from the UN process, pulling out of the treaty, submitting it to the Senate for ratification. And it looks like he's going to. It's, you never know what's going to happen, but that's all indications are.
And presidents often use executive orders and executive action. Let's talk about the Labor Secretary, potential Labor Secretary, Andrew Puzder. There are some things that he seems clearly in line with Donald Trump on when it comes to not raising the minimum wage, things like that. But one place where he seems to veer away from Donald Trump is when it comes to immigration policy. And as we know, immigration policy butts right up against labor. So what do you think that says for? He says that he thinks that border security is basically secondary to the economic needs that the immigration force can provide. He believes in the DREAM Act. These are all things that Donald Trump has said he's against.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, because there's a couple. He actually has one of his education picks actually believes in Common Core. So you're not going to get every single thing you ask for in that in terms of the beliefs of every cabinet. But Donald Trump will ultimately set the policy. So even if the Labor Secretary is on record as having something contrary, it's ultimately going to be Donald Trump's decision to decide that. But I will say it's refreshing that these are not unlike the previous two Republican Bush administrations, this is not essentially retreads of Washington insiders and a lot of people coming in. He's bringing in a lot of outsiders, and yes, many of them are self-made or CEO types, but a lot of people voted for Donald Trump to have just that happen, to bring in fresh faces and new people like that to actually run these agencies. And ultimately, it's going to be Donald Trump and his policies leading it, but these are very competent and exciting choices for the American people. These are not career bureaucrats. These are people. We have Ben Carson as an example at HUD. He's probably the first HUD secretary to actually live in the inner city, grew up in it. So that this is, you know, it's a refreshing change in Washington.
But he did not live in public housing, though.
No, not in public housing.
All right.
But, I mean, he grew up. He did not grow up well.
Understand. Yeah. Marc Morano, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.